everyone, and welcome back to the 12th episode of Million Dollar Ideas. This episode is going to be slightly different from our regular programming because Ken and I have been doing this for 2 months, and we thought it would be a good point to take a pause, reflect on everything that's happened in the last 12 episodes, which is actually, close to 2.5, 3 months of work, and evaluate where we are, what's happening, if we want to switch up things. So with that, welcome to the show. Also, Ken, how are you feeling this week?
Pretty good.
Yeah. I've done a podcast before. I ran a Tan Stories podcast. We did around 10, 15 episodes, and then we didn't really move forward after that because it was also like we couldn't get momentum going. And I also didn't feel like doing it every single week. So how do you feel about MDI today? Like, is it something that you look forward to every week personally?
Yeah, I would say I really enjoy it. I enjoy the process. It always feels a little bit better when like the video does well. But regardless, for me, it's, I like doing these things that I enjoy doing. And I also think like even if the results don't show it, like we're getting a little bit better, like we're feeling more comfortable a lot. So yeah, I view it as like it checks my boxes in terms of I'm doing something I enjoy and I feel like I'm developing.
No, same here. I feel like with every episode, I was excited whether I'm coming in with one idea or I'm coming in with 2 ideas. We've already thought about them. I have this nice repository. I have a nice Claude prompt that I've actually developed for myself to rate my ideas when I have them and how to improve them. So perhaps we can take people behind the scene with some of that stuff as well so that they can actually use something. Maybe that could be just an episode that we could do of how to actually build a Claude bot, which could help you evaluate your ideas and workshop you through that, because I think that could be interesting. When you come up with the idea, what's your back and forth? Do you just review it in your head, write it down, or like how do you sort of like evaluate the idea?
My ideas come at various inspiration points. So sometimes when I'm watching a podcast, sometimes like I'm working on something and I'm looking for a solution. And I'm like, oh, this doesn't exist. Or yeah. And then it's kind of like this. And then I always write down first the context that led me to the idea. And then I use kind of the template that we established to further think out, does this make a good idea?
And the whole thing is like ideas come to you all the time, the ability to stop and write them down, because I've been doing this as well. So there have been several instances that I've shared in the last couple of podcasts that, I was watching my niece doing this. Someone asked me this question. This didn't exist. And therefore, this is an interesting idea that would be cool if it existed in the world today. And I think like we've reached a point where, the channel has 68 subscribers at the time of this recording. Our videos are not dud videos with single-digit views. Some of them have done over 500 views, but on average to around like maybe 100-ish sort of like views. And I think like for both of us, we also wanted to create stuff which resonates with audiences. And I think this is relevant for anyone who's building a startup. Like you could be very into your startup, but ultimately you also want to align it with things that you enjoy doing and that the customer also wants in this world. And that intersection is basically what everyone is looking for when they're running a business. Because I don't know about you, but I've definitely run businesses in the past where I didn't enjoy the work so much, but I was getting paid. And those are like difficult businesses or jobs to run. Like any sort of like experiences with stuff like that?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I've had those experiences where I really enjoy it, but like I'm not getting the results I want, but I just continue because I really enjoy it. And then I've had those experiences, like you said, where I'm just doing it for the money and like I don't really enjoy it. I don't really enjoy the environment, but like I get my passion and my motivation elsewhere.
Yeah. And so with this podcast, like we already had this. So I think it's a format tweaking that we probably need to do. So this episode is going to be a much shorter one. And we're going to walk you through 4 or 5 variation ideas that we have. And my hope is that some of you are going to respond in the comments or DM us and let us know which ones resonated with you more, and then we can take it from there. So let's get started with the first one. The first variation that we've discussed is to pick one founder who is at the earliest stages of starting a business, or they were interested in one of our ideas. And we would, together with them every week, do a podcast which would go much deeper on their business and say, okay, here's this idea we now need to execute. Here's what we should be doing on a weekly basis. The founder who joins the podcast should be far more vested in this and will start to lead the project. And Ken and I will sort of like support the project and also act like advisors. But also, like, if all three of us agree, like, this is an idea we're interested in, we would provide an insight as to how you go from idea to actually building something out and validating it. Not even building the business, just validating the idea first and then taking it from there. Any thoughts on that, Ken?
It's very interesting to me because I think a lot of people want to see that, especially if they haven't been through the process themselves, or some people have been through the process, but you want to learn how others do it and what they can learn from that. And you don't see many podcasts take this approach. It feels like there's an audience for that. It also feels a little bit risky because, like, I don't know of a great example of this. So that's the way I view it.
Yeah, I agree. It's pretty risky for someone to do it. But what I would encourage most people to do is, like, we're not saying like, okay, this is your idea now and you're going to actually build it. It's a validation process, which could turn into a startup. And if that happens, it's great. More likely than not, during validation, you discover that, oh, this idea that we thought was really great really doesn't resonate with anyone. And that could be really helpful for people too. So that's option number one, of going very deep with one person on a weekly basis. And it becomes like one of those startup shows that you may have watched in the past, which are fairly more dramatized as to what's happening. But this one would be like, what's the work that needs to get done? Option number two is a variation of one, but one which doesn't go as deep per se. So we take a handful of founders who are at the earliest of stages of their companies, let's say 4 or 6 of them. And every month we would check in with them and almost act like a virtual board to give them sort of like feedback as to what's happening. They could share their problems and concerns. And this would also, in a way, provide an insight into startups growing, but at the same time would not be as slow as option one. It would provide a variety for people where you would see someone once a month and there would be 4 founders, let's say, that we get started with. And it would still be following their journey for, let's say, 3-4 months. Like, what do you think?
Yeah. So I run a mastermind for over 2 years. Me and 3 other guys, we met each other through Dynamite Circle, which is like a small business entrepreneur community, pretty active in Southeast Asia. And we were doing this weekly and then bi-weekly. So I've seen the value of this. Like, as an entrepreneur, I love doing this. Like, I literally, yes, 2 years in, I still love getting on the call every 2 weeks with these 3 guys because we develop a rapport and I get to know, them as individuals. And I think there's a lot that comes out, and this external perspective ends up being quite valuable. Like, when you have 3 other smart guys that are also entrepreneurial and they're giving you how they would approach the same problem, like, that is a good, it is much better to choose a solution after having 4 opinions than just having your own. Like, I've consistently seen that to be the case.
I fully agree. Having been also not as strict as you with masterminds, but having people in, whether that coaching capacity or people who I call on to give me feedback when I'm going through something, it really helps. And I think, like, for the founders, this would be helpful as well, because Ken and I would sort of like go through that hour with you and then we would help you think through things. And then for the founder, it also becomes like assets that they could use to talk about their business and things like that, and builds a far more authentic connection with whoever they're trying to sell to or build a business around. And I think like the variety could be interesting for the channel as well, because we would have like, let's say if we do find 4 people that agree to this, every week you would have rotation, and that would keep the channel fresh as well with content, and we could see how that sort of like goes. So that's option number 2. Option number 3 is a bit of a switch around, which is that one of the things that I regularly do is scout for new businesses, whether that's like, or ideas, whether that's looking at product hunt or anything like that. So one idea could be that every week, Ken and I would pick one idea that or product that has launched on, let's say, Product Hunt or anywhere that it was announced as the new product that's come to market recently that we really like and we believe it has a potential to hit $1 million in ARR. So naturally, this will be sort of like prediction markets for us as well, but also would be like both of us would come with one product or a startup that's launched that week. And say like, we like this because of this reason. And it would sort of like provide a deep dive onto that. And episodes would go through 2, not our ideas, but we would then use actual live case ideas that are already launched in the market and give our own feedback on those ideas. So yeah. Can you do that? Like, do you regularly go to Product Hunt or?
I honestly haven't done that in a long time. And I should. Like, I think there's some great ideas on there. You meet some really great entrepreneurs. And I remember someone talking about how like they would scout for good ideas on there and then even like reach out to the teams and do stuff together. So I think is a great channel that I should use more.
And I think it'll just be interesting, right? So these are new companies. You're almost sort of like evaluating them. I would imagine that we would do everything from evaluating the idea to evaluating the positioning of the company, from evaluating who the customer is very clear, because a lot of the time that's not very well done for early stage startups because they try to, I made the mistake, cater to too many people. Your demographic is everyone in the ages of 18 and 25. Like, sure, you could go B2C, but I think like I would have thoughts on that and we would do that every week. And that could be interesting. And those founders, maybe they hear the podcast episode and come on to the podcast as well to share their journey. Could be interesting as a funnel for different options. So that's option number 3. Option number 4 is that we maintain the status quo and we, instead of doing 4 ideas a week, we come with 2 ideas. 1 idea for myself, 1 idea for Ken. And maybe if we have a guest, we just do 1 idea from both of us and then 1 idea from the guest so that we can actually go much deeper on new ideas. It would be a twist on option 3 where the origination would be from us versus from someone else who's done it. It would be very similar to what we're doing right now, other than just going much deeper onto each idea. What do you think, Ken? Do you think that works with guests and stuff like that?
No, I think it can work with guests, like kind of the way that Greg Eisenberg's doing it with all the AI stuff, especially if they can visually build the product in front of you a little bit. I think that's very effective. Like I really enjoy watching them build some app using Replit, Cursor, all this.
Yeah, that could be. I mean, that gives me another idea, which was not on our list because we had 5 options, but now just listening to that could be like for us with either a guest or with an idea, sort of like doing that validation thing and just recording that like as a quick sort of like way, like here's an interesting idea, here's what we would do. We would use all the new tools, right? So we would use Cursor, V0, all the ways how to generate all these assets and say like, because the whole deal is like the show is like called $1 Million Ideas because there's the idea stage is the first initial stage, which you get, like we said, it comes wherever inspiration strikes. And there's this segment between idea to validation where a lot of people suddenly take that idea and just make it a startup, where I think like there's a slower point whereby you go to validate with customers. And how do you do that really effectively and well could be another option that we could do. My only fear with that is like in option 2, we spoke about 1 month cycles. like when you're doing a weekly cycle of validation, you don't get as much data. So it's not as glamorous as people think about it and might be a bit slower for people. Yeah, you just saying that made me think about like just putting that out into the world.
Another twist on this one that I think is interesting, and it relates also to the product hunt idea. But I really like, as I watch all these Gen Z kids, it's always this content first approach. So that's the other thing, is like looking at some guys who are making some good progress on TikTok or YouTube Shorts, and then just talking about, all right, what business should they start and how would they do it? That I think is also an interesting twist on that.
Yeah, we're definitely entering this age of distribution like above everything else now. So if the ability to build something is being further pushed down, because if everyone can build, then basically the people who own the distribution rails are going to be even more valuable. And for like some of these influencers, that could be like pretty interesting for us to at least spot them, find them, and then actually see what they're doing. In fact, you've sent me a couple of videos of some of these kids that have blown up with just their own tools, and surfacing their stories could be an interesting way, because several of them are doing multiple $1 million a year in revenue now. And it would be cool to show that to people, because I don't think that they get as much screen time as some of the majors do. And that would be interesting. All right. So that was, I think, variation number 6 already. And so I'll close with variation number 7, which is that Ken and I gracefully say, all right, we've come to the end of the road. And I feel like this option should always exist on things. And I would only exercise this option. So disclaimer to people, I don't think that we're going to stop. But I feel like if we started the episode and Ken was like, or I was like, I'm not that excited about coming with ideas every week, then I think like after 12 episodes, there's no shame in saying like, we gave this a shot. It's not that interesting anymore. We said we would do 10 episodes here. We've done them. And then on to the next one.
We could do that.
Yeah.
I would be sad. But,
right. Yeah.
But no, but I think you always got to keep that option in the back pocket.
All right. So we've reached the end of the episode, and I want to give everyone a quick recap of all 5 options. To set some context for this clip, Ken and I have been running the $1 Million Idea podcast for the last 2-3 months. We've done 12 episodes, and now we're trying to figure out what it takes to improve the podcast even more. I'm going to rattle off 5 options that we're currently deciding between, and my hope is that you're going to give us some feedback and some sort of like ideas as to how we should proceed. So with that, let me get started. So option number 1 is that we would pick an idea, perhaps from our podcast or from somewhere else, and with one founder. And every week it would be like a startup reality show where we would talk about like what's happening, how they're progressing, and give you a blow by blow as to how a business progresses. Option number 2 is where instead of just following one person, we would actually build a panel of, let's say, 4 founders. And every week you would get to hear as to what's happening in that founder's life. And Ken and I would almost act like a board of advisors, and we would bring in guests at time as well to give that person more relevant feedback. Option 3 is where instead of Ken and I coming up with our own ideas every week, we would actually scour something like Product Hunt and come up with one idea that we believe each that could hit $1 million. This would be more of a deep dive on the execution of the idea, the clarity of the idea, and it will help you viewers to understand how we evaluate businesses and generally give them an idea for their own. Option number 4 would be where instead currently of doing 4 ideas in a podcast, we would cut that down to 2. So Ken and I would still come up with ideas, but we would go much deeper on each idea that we pitch. And option number 5 is nuclear option, which is like, we're like, okay, this is not working so much anymore. And we are just going to call a spade and say like, this was an interesting experiment, and we'll take it from there. So with that, I hope that, we're really looking for for advice from all of you and feedback from everyone who's watched and subscribed so far. Thank you very much for that. And I hope that you'll give us some feedback, and we'll let you know next week as to what we're doing. Do you want to add anything to that, Ken?
I think if we don't get feedback or we don't get much of it, then we'll assume everyone that didn't give feedback definitely wants us to continue. So if you don't want us to continue, you have to write a comment.
Right. Yeah, that sounds like a good one. So yeah, I look forward to collecting feedback from everyone, and keep a lookout as to what we pick. And we'll definitely get in touch with all of you next week then. All right, take care, everyone. See ya.